All right, y'all. So this is the last lesson that you guys have been getting from me on exploration this week. If, as of my recording right now, you guys are looking at the lesson that I made for you regarding Spain and Portugal and their explorations and where they went and the stuff that they did. So now this lesson today is about the white people, meaning people from England, France, and then there's the Dutch from the Netherlands, right? And where did they go to explore the world? What people groups did they exploit when they went there? And what conflicts did they get into? So today is about England, France, and the Dutch, all right? Overview of what happened, 20 minutes. Here we go. Okay, we're going to share the screen as usual. And I'll take you to where we're supposed to be. So you'll notice that, again, you always look at the date, okay? So today's lesson is the 9th. You can see that the purpose of this lesson is to understand the effects. For those of you that have been in class with me, I showed you my poster that's got all the thinking skills listed on there. We're looking at the effects of Northern European exploration, England, France, and the Dutch on the Americas and other parts of the world, okay? My lecture video, which you've already clicked on, will be embedded here. So here's a map that gives you guys a sense of where everybody went. If you look up here, you'll notice that in blue is the area that the French explored, okay? Up here in pink, I guess, or salmon, or whatever you want to call that, this is the what we would call the 13 colonies, right? That's where England sent people during the age of exploration. And remember that all of this is following what Spain had already done. So take a look here, Spanish Florida. Most people don't realize that at this time in history, we're talking the late 1600s, early 1700s, so 300-ish years ago. Spain was still Florida was still owned by Spain, right? And all this kind of brownish, whatever you want to call that color, that's all stuff that Spain claimed, right? So we got Spain, Britain, and France, okay? And some of this purple is stuff that France in an earlier conflict had been forced to give to England. And there is a sliver here that they don't show it on this map, but the Dutch actually went to what is present day New York. So I'll be talking about that in a minute, right? So here are the claims in North America. You got to realize that, why did France and England take all this stuff in North America? Well, because if you can picture the map in your mind, Spain already had claim to all of Central America, big parts of South America, all the way here through what we call Mexico into the what is the present Southwest United States, all right? So Spain already had these claims, it's sort of Portugal. So France and England and the Dutch had to go somewhere that wasn't already claimed. And so that's why you've got all this up here that I'm showing you. And remember, nobody cares about the Native Americans. Like none of the European powers, this doesn't even come into their mind, right? If they could have, they all would have enslaved the Native Americans, being savages, but that's not going to work out for reasons I'm going to describe in a later lesson with you when we talk about the transatlantic slave trade. So I'll get to that later. Just know right now what the claims were because I only got 20 minutes with you. Okay. So the Dutch founded an outpost known as New Amsterdam. That's right. Even old New York was once New Amsterdam. So an old song goes that you've probably never heard of. But New Amsterdam is present-day New York. That was a Dutch trading post, right? And the Dutch, you guys need to understand, they're not interested in establishing colonies in the Americas. They're putting a trading post there that they could get the goods out of America and trade with internationally. They are mostly, if you look at what I wrote here, the Dutch are an international trade and banking empire. That's what they're trying to do. They have a decent fleet, right? Their Navy's decent. In the Americas, they're going to set up trading posts here. But England will eventually find this Dutch trading post at New Amsterdam is like in the way. Like it breaks up the colonies here. Okay, hold on. All right. So what happens is New Amsterdam is kind of in the way. There's colonies here that England's trying to settle. So the British just take their superior navy. They come in, turn their guns on the Dutch at New Amsterdam and be like, we're taking this now. And so when the British take New Amsterdam, they rename it after the Duke of York. You guys get the picture? So now it is New York. I want to be a part of it. New York, New York. And so right from the beginning, actually, this New York colony that used to be Dutch and now belongs to Britain is very diverse because people came there to trade from all over the Americas. And so that's kind of never changed, right? When you think about one of the most diverse cities in the present day United States, it's New York, right? So, but the Dutch had an outpost there for trading and purposes to build their trade and banking empire. Out east, okay, in Asia, I don't have a map of it right here, but the Dutch had gone east as well, okay? And that brought them in conflict with the Portuguese, right? If you remember, the Portuguese had gone around the tip of Africa out to India, the great prize, which was the East Indies, like India and China. The Dutch wanted to get in on that game. And Portugal had gotten all the way to India. Portugal had converted some Indian people actually to the Catholic religion, which is why I always end up with like Catholic Indian kids in class. That happens more than you guys would think, even though the dominant religion there is Hindu. And then second is Islam. But we'll oftentimes end up with like Christian kids in class. And why is that are Indian? It's because the Portuguese went there and they brought missionaries to convert people. But because the Portuguese had reached India and was getting, the silks, the spices, and all the stuff that they wanted out of India, the Dutch also wanted access to Asia. And what is present day Indonesia, right? A collection of islands and such in Southeast Asia. The Dutch went there and formed what were known as the Dutch East Indies, okay? And there was a company known as the Dutch East India Company whose job it was to get spices and whatever, silk or gold or whatever they can find and bring it back to Europe to make money, okay? And so the Dutch are kind of all over the world. They're in Asia and they're in the Americas, although they get kicked out of the Americas by Britain. But they're interested in this international trade and banking. They're interested in money, right? The Dutch really aren't converting people to Christianity. That's not their bag, okay? Now, the French are going to go to Canada and the Great Lakes region, what we call the Ohio River Valley. So when you take a look at this map and my cursor, it's right here, okay? You ever wonder like why everything sounds French around the Great Lakes area? And look at the name of our state, Illinois, right? Illinois, right? Like why don't we pronounce the S in Illinois? Because it's French, right? And all these Great Lakes regions, like a lot of the names that we have for stuff around here are either Native American names or they're French, because the French really, really explored Canada and the Great Lakes area, as well as down into here, Louisiana, all the way down to New Orleans. Some of you probably are aware that there's a lot of French influence in New Orleans. So this area, the French were interested in setting up, again, trading outposts, especially, okay? The French really did trade with the Native Americans. And the primary, oh, by the way, side note, Canada, Quebec, think about it. They still speak French there in Quebec. It's the influence, the cultural hegemony that I've been talking about, all right? When it came to the Native Americans, the French were interested in acquiring fur and trading for that. So that is why you've got, I've got this listed here. That's what France is interested in. Because this is a highly prized item. It's a luxury item. Fur is a luxury item, greatly desired back in Europe. But there were also French missionaries, Jesuits, You're like, wait a minute, Moretti, didn't Spain bring Jesuits with them also to convert people to the Catholic religion? Yes, good job. You remembered that. But remember that Spain is almost entirely Catholic. I mean, there are some Jews and Muslims there, but it's mostly Catholic. And but so France is at least 50-50 Catholic Protestant. So it's probably actually heavier leaning Catholic. So the Jesuits, they're missionaries spreading the Catholic religion. So Jesuit missionaries that were part of that order that I've already taught you guys about in a previous lesson, Saint Ignatius of Loyola, all right? So that's why everything around us right now in Illinois seems to be named after Loyola. Like, who's this Loyola guy? Well, like, Saint Ignatius of Loyola is the guy that founded the Jesuits, right? And so it's a Catholic missionary group whose job it is to spread the Catholic religion around the world. And it's partially a response to the Protestant Reformation. The Catholics want to spread their religion at a faster rate, their version of Christianity, I should say, at a faster rate than the Protestants are. And they looked at the Americas as an opportunity to do that. They're trying to convert Native Americans to the Catholic religion with mixed results at best. But that's why there's so much stuff here, especially in Illinois, that is references to like Loyola, this or that, or like we all the French sounding names, because we were a major area that the French explored, or along with Michigan and Wisconsin and all these areas. Okay? Fur trade and missionary work. Converting the savages to Christianity. Meanwhile, England starts its 13 colonies that y'all are familiar with, right? And here they are. And the thing about the 13 colonies, you need to remember that the first colony was in Jamestown, all right? Jamestown, Virginia, all right? And that was 1607, okay? The first colony for England that got established in the Americas, Jamestown, Virginia, 1607. And they quickly discovered that there's no gold, right, in Jamestown to speak of. And the fur's like, meh, right? But tobacco, baby, right? And the British introduced a seed of tobacco that could grow that far north, because usually tobacco grows down here, down like, in the Caribbean, okay? In the hot, swampy, right, areas. Spain grew a lot of tobacco from their possessions down there, forcing the natives on those encomiendas, right, that I told you guys about the other day. Well, the British are trying to grow their own tobacco, and they finally get a seed that'll grow in the more milder climate in Virginia and in the Carolinas and eventually Georgia, right? And so these are cash crops. And I remind you, the cash crops can be replanted. So they're like a source of revenue that keeps growing, okay? Unlike gold, when you dig it out of the ground once and it's gone. So that's why cash cropping becomes such a lucrative thing. People in Europe are crazy for American tobacco. They love it. And so this is a huge source of revenue for the British, what they're seeking, okay? And they are summarily pushing the Native Americans out, right? There were several wars between the British and the Native Americans that, I'm not really going to get into right now, but we will get into those when we get into AP US history. You guys see me in a couple of years. I'll tell you about some of the wars that Britain fights with the Native Americans. But that's why the Thanksgiving story is BS, right? Because, you sit together and you have this friendly meal with the Native Americans to try and feel each other out. But within a couple of years, it's like full on war, and the whites are looking to kill the Native Americans and push them out so they can take their land. That's really what this turns into, okay? I'm going to talk more about the concept of a joint stock company later, but you guys got to know this concept. England's not the only one doing it. Every major European country has joint stock companies. Like, for example, this Dutch East India Company I mentioned earlier, right? That's a joint stock company. And all these are groups of investors in Europe who pool their money together to fund an expedition to the New World. And the idea is whatever the explorers find of value and send back to Europe, the original investors get a cut from that, okay? And so joint stock companies are formed to invest overseas to make money, okay? So understand that concept, because as more area is discovered and as more Native American people groups are exploited and as more Africans are brought as slave labor to make money for all these companies, there is a lot of money generated for the whites that are running this thing, okay? And that's why it continues on for a very long period of time, for hundreds of years, okay? Now, the one group that you've probably heard of are the Puritans, right? The Pilgrims. Yeah, the Pilgrims who landed up north here in Massachusetts, right? On the Mayflower, right? So the Puritans or Pilgrims, who were these guys? Well, you're going to learn more about their story later, okay, grasshoppers? But basically, they were religious extremists. Again, I will tell you their story later. But they're Calvinists who, if you were paying attention to my earlier lessons, Calvinist Protestant Christians, so they're totally anti-Catholic, these folks who landed at Plymouth Rock, okay, up in Massachusetts. These are the ones that Calvinists believe in predestination, right? They believe in an extreme version of Protestant Christianity. They rejected not only the Catholic Church, but they rejected the Anglican Protestant Church in England. And they splintered off because they believed that they were elected by God, that they were predestined by God to go to heaven. And so they wanted to set up their perfect model Christian society as evidence that their version of Christianity was correct and that they were predetermined by God to go to heaven. And so they're going to prove it by creating the perfect Christian society. So they left England claiming persecution, and they went to what is now Massachusetts, right? They landed at Plymouth. That expanded into something called the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and they were here for so-called religious freedom. Now, I'm going to tell you that the idea of religious freedom is hilarious with these guys because they were extremists. They basically told everybody else in England that their version of Christianity was wrong. And so, yeah, people didn't like them, okay? And so they ended up leaving and coming to the New World, all right? Initial relationship between them and the Native Americans was like, meh, but then it kind of turned into all-out war. And these elect Christian people in Massachusetts ended up slaughtering Native Americans and claiming land for themselves in Massachusetts in the north, okay, for England. Conflicts. Let me end this last lesson with a couple of conflicts, all right? So in the Far East, in Asia, you've got conflicts between the Dutch and the Muslims as their navies fight each other for trading rights in India. Okay, again, I want to remind you, the Indian people didn't have any real say in this, just like the Native Americans don't have any say in a lot of what is going on, just like Africans don't have a say in becoming slaves, right? Like these are Europeans struggling for power and using the resources, the people that are native to those lands for their own benefit, right? The Dutch and the Muslims clashing, the Muslims under the Ottoman Empire clashing in Asia, right? Not to mention the Portuguese. And then the biggest clash of all is the French and Indian War, okay? Which is also known as the 7 Years' War, okay? So that name throws a lot of people. It's not the French fighting the Indians, right? The French and Indian War was a name that was created, that was used by American colonists, all right? At this time, Americans are British citizens, and we like being British citizens. This is before our revolution, right? And British colonists, right, are going to fight with England in a war against France and the French Native American allies, okay? Most of the Native American tribes in the region sided with the French in this conflict. Some went with the English, but most went with the French because they knew the French better. Now, you're going to ask, like, why, Moretti, would the Native Americans fight with either side? And my answer to you, grasshoppers, is because they can see the writing on the wall. The Native Americans at this point in the Great Lakes region understand that they are outgunned, okay? And what they're hoping to do is join the white people that they think are going to win in this conflict. They're really caught in the middle of this. And in that way, the French and Indian War, or 7 Years' War as it's called, it's fought for control of the fur trade in this region of the Great Lakes, okay? And it lasted from 1754 to 1763. Now, those of you that are like, you know, math majors are like, wait, Moretti, that's not 7 years, that's 9 years. All right, don't do the math. It's still called the 7 Years' War, okay? So you have the 7 Years' War, or in America, it's called the French and Indian War. It's Britain versus France, with the Native Americans caught in the middle, forced to choose a side. Most of the Native Americans choose the French, which turns out to be not good because the French are going to lose this fight, okay? Britain will win the French and Indian War, you know, using us as American colonists to help them, right? They're going to win the French and Indian War. And when that happens, see all this blue territory? The French are going to be forced out of North America. They will still have some influence in Quebec, but otherwise they are ousted from North America as a result of the French and Indian War, and England will take over all this territory, right? From Canada all the way down, Britain's going to control it. At least they're going to control it up to the Mississippi River here, okay? So the results of the French and Indian War, if you see, was that France is pretty much forced out, opening the way for British settlers, the 13 colonies, right? Us as Americans are going to be able to expand a little further west because of all of this, because we won, right? American colonists, obviously, we're British citizens. We supported Britain in this conflict. And so now, you know, many Native Americans were killed in this conflict. And it's a great example of the whole ethnocentric attitude of Europeans at this time. Here you've got two white powers, France and Britain, fighting for Native American land. And the Native Americans are just a stepping stone to the empire building that France and England are trying to do. And it's like, just really drives home what I'm trying to get you guys to understand in these lessons on the Age of Exploration, right? Yeah, these explorers and whatnot might be considered heroes to white people. But as far as the Native Americans and Africans, as you will see, will be used as slaves in all of this, like this is, you know, you got to step out of your European white box and see the big picture, all right, of what's going on here. And so the French and Indian War, depicted in this painting here, ends up as a victory for England, and France's power is diminished as a result, okay? So that kind of ends our lecture today. I will be getting into some of the nitty-gritty elements of the effects of all this Age of Exploration this next week, and we have a test coming up soon, okay? So I will see you guys next lesson.